Welcome to the fourth episode of the LEX podcast. I'm pleased to have with me here today Ashish Panjabi. Ashish is a very well-known face in the Middle East, largely focusing on entrepreneurship as president of Thai Dubai. But in his larger role, he's also the chief operating officer of Jacky's. Ashish, very pleased to have you here. I know you've been a firm advocate of startups and the startup ecosystem. So it's great to have you here. And we hope we'll gain a lot of insights on this very important topic of employee experience through you, especially with your experience of running a business, looking at customer experience and how we could learn from there, as well as learning from your enthusiasm about technology and see how technology could play a role in it.
Thanks, Nishit, and honestly, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast. And thank you for all the work that all of you do. I think there's so many stories out there, and it's great to hear the stories that you put out as well.
Great. So let's get started, Ashish. 24 years ago, when I was a student of accounting, I was taught that expense is not a good thing. Now people are saying human resources is the biggest asset, human capital, whatever you call it. So how have you seen the role of people change in the way businesses look at success over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been the most important commodity because that's what everyone sees. That's always been the customer facing side of it. And I remember a story when I first moved to Dubai many years ago, and I was talking to someone in another retail trade. They were in the garment industry, and he said, "We hire people and we have a fixed salary, and if we can get them to work in that salary, we make them work, and if they don't work, we'll find someone else." And by and large, most of his recruitment was from the subcontinent, and he said, "We recruit from tier 1 cities. If we don't find someone in a tier 1 city who's willing to work in that price, we'll go to a tier 2 city. If we don't find someone in a tier 2 city, we'll go to a tier 3 town or village, and we'll go downwards until we find someone, and they'll work for us." And I was coming in there from the electronics business, and I said, "We cannot do that in our business because our guys are selling technology, and they need to be able to converse with the customer. And they need to be able to talk about features and products and specifications and to make that whole journey that much more comfortable." And I looked at it, I said, he can maybe do it over there because there the role of the salesperson is probably just stocking up shelves and cleaning up merchandise. And our business, I said, no chance, especially with the fact that you had such a diverse population in Dubai coming in at that stage, and it's only gotten more diverse since then. You really need to have quality people because they are the face of your company at the end of the day. It's like that in any office as well. You talk to a lot of people, they say the first impression we get is the receptionist in the office. That is the face of the company that they see. And it's the same thing as we moved on into this world where everything has gone digital. It's that first email communication. It's that first virtual communication you may have. It's that first telephone conversation that you have. That sort of sets your impression about what a brand is. And I had a similar experience last night. I went on the website of a major coffee brand over here.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to buy coffee. I wanted to get some more pods, and I go on their website and nothing was in stock. And they have a customer service tab, and I click on that and I send them a little email and I go, "I've been wondering why everything is out of stock." And they reply back and say, "But we sell on different marketplaces and we've got retailers that have got a product in stock. You can go buy it from them." That wasn't my question. My question is, why don't you have it in stock? Because I've been buying it from you all this time. And I replied back and said, "So will you be selling it in future, or will I have to go and hunt and search for it every time?" Because the problem is you find this coffee here, but they don't have the other thing. And then you end up going around all over town. And the whole reason I started buying it online was for that experience. Now, that brand probably outsources that role of their customer service.
Mhm.
But now for me, that's an image that sits in my head when I think about them, because I'm now thinking this is where they're coming from an experience point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And this example is one of the many. Like if you walk into a branch of a bank these days, most likely you'll be greeted by a person in security who doubles up as the customer service person and tells you where the forms are, where the pen is, and where to kind of look for documents. So it's kind of ironic that the first impression, which often is the last impression, is where organizations are compromising on.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I think it's a question of how well you execute with it. The security guard is a sincere person, but
Mm.
that person can also be trained to do a brilliant job, and can be seen that if he feels he's empowered or she feels she's empowered in that way, and is given that knowledge and is put on the perch that way, and they will work with their customers in that way as well. There is nothing to say that a security guard working in a bank, working in a store, or working anywhere else isn't as important a feature over there. They can give the right impression as you walk in. I mean, I would
As
walk
long
in,
as they are trained and as long as they are
as long as they're trained,
equipped to
as long
handle
as they
that
do a good
queries.
job, as long as they're courteous enough and they're understanding and they know how to help the customer. Fantastic.
No, that's excellent. So that brings me to the second kind of stage here. Uh, I've been to the Dubai Mall, and there are like a stream of shops on either side of the aisle selling the same stuff. Right? You walk into store A, store B, store C,
Yeah.
everyone sells the same stuff, pretty much the same price, pretty much the same promotion.
Mm.
How do you as a business differentiate yourself on, say, customer experience? Because it's the same thing. When I walk into the store, I may not know everything about the product that I'm looking to buy. I may not even be sure which product I want to buy. I may know I want to buy a phone, but which phone I don't know, or a printer, and which
Mm.
printer I
Mm.
don't know.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So how are you inculcating the sense of customer experience at Jackie's so that customers get that great experience?
So there are various ways, and I think it's an interesting point you bring up. Now we live in a place where it was always a feeling of bigger is better, or more is powerful, and I think that's a big misnomer, because bigger and better often means you end up compromising somewhere, because you may not have enough to fill up that big space at the end of the day, and it's always been about quality. So the one thing we always looked at in our retail footprint was about having the right size store. We didn't look at the biggest, we didn't look at the most locations ever. And we looked at it from the perspective, and we said, how do we do it in a good enough way? And for us, what worked well was a store that was maximum 5,000 square feet. And then we sort of worked it and said between 1,800 to 5,000 square feet, we can have the right product, we can have the right staff, we can have the right displays, and we can make sure we have a good enough experience for the customer in there. You've got the right people who know the right products with them at the same time. You're not keeping more products than you need, and you're not confusing the customer at the end of the day, at that end. And the philosophy was always very clear. So even Mr. Jacky, the group founder, always said, if a customer walks in and says, I want to buy a Canon camera, don't try and sell him a Nikon. He wants a Canon. Respect the customer in that sense, that they know what they want. You may have other products on display, but if a customer's walked in that determined to say, this is what I want, don't rock the boat at that stage, because this is often what starts to happen. Is a person walks in for one thing, and you've got a merchandiser from a different brand, and he's going to try and confuse you and start talking about everything else except what you want to buy. And that's an experience that sits with the customer. But that's also an employee or a merchandiser that was in the store that wasn't properly trained to understand what the customer wanted. And that plays a very important part in what you do. Now, the example you gave of a whole bunch of multi-brand retail stores sitting once upon a time, was the same thing we looked at. And there was a time when we had our store in Data City Center, and we would sell cameras in Data City Center. And the camera category was interesting because you had about 3 brands that were about 40% of the market: Canon, Nikon, and Sony.
Mm.
And everything else sort of was 5 to 8% market share. So they were significant enough that they had to be there, and you couldn't eliminate any one of them. So you ended up selling about 12 or 13 brands of cameras, knowing that 3 cameras made up 40% of your sales, and the balance was 60%. But that 60% came from 8 or 9 brands. So you had to do justice to all the brands that were there. Now, what happens is when you end up displaying that many products, you need to have that many salespeople for those products as well. And the way we used to have it is we used to have these long counters, and you would come in and there would be these little fish tank counters where you could see the products, and we'd have a salesperson standing behind the counters. And one day Mr. Jacky walked in and he goes, "Those guys standing behind the counters look as if they're waiting for a bus." And I don't know where that bus is going, but they look like they're at a bus stop. And do we really want to have that as an experience for what happens over there? Now, we realized that, and we looked at it, and we started looking at what can we do differently with the store and with the whole customer experience. And we took a decision back in 2014 where a lot of the competition was moving from single brand retailing into multi-brand retailing. And we were always multi-brand retailers. And we went the opposite way, and we said, we're going to open single brand stores. And we started opening stores for Samsung. Right. And we converted that same Data City Center store into a Samsung store. Now, granted, that was one of our busiest stores and one of our best performing stores. But we took a decision and went the other way, saying that the top line will probably change. But what we're going to have is a store that's focused, that has the products that people want in those brands, in that brand. So televisions, smartphones, tablets, monitors, home appliances. But we'll make sure we've got extremely knowledgeable salespeople. We're going to have an environment where the customer walks in and isn't going to get confused with anything else because they're there to buy a Samsung product, and they know full well. So all the other noise that comes in from the other brands being in that store is gone. And we're going to make sure we give them the best experience that is possible. And lo and behold, we did start to see that change happen. And a lot of people turned around and said, "How can you be doing this? You can't run as a single brand store. Everyone is going into multi-brand. Why are you doing this?" It worked. The short story is it actually worked. We started to see sales jump, and in many of the locations we're actually doing as well as we did as a multi-brand store, but with only one brand, and we sold that brand extremely well. And again, it's a question of what did we do for the customer in that case. We had the repair centers in the store. You had a product that you wanted to get fixed, you brought it in there. We started going out and saying, okay, you bought a product in the mall from another store or from a hypermarket. We'll set it up for you. Now, we'll set it up for you means the customer's walked in, has understood the experience, has looked at it and said, okay, you know what, the pricing is not that different from here versus where I bought it from. But there it was all the pushing and shoving and trying to get a thing, and the whole experience of trying to pay and everything else. And they didn't even set it up for me. Whereas here they're setting it up for me. And you start to see that customer come back to you the second time. Or they start to buy the accessories from you. Great. And that for us was what experience. Because we realized at that time, you can either play in the market where everyone is, and your only USP is price, or you start to play the service game, and you start to look at the experience game, and you start to say, what can I do with that experience, and how can I make it that much better?
So if I have to kind of take some key messages from there, The first is to think from the customer's perspective. The whole customer eyes which saw the bus stop rather than the counter shelf is the customer's perspective. Then it is also a lot about focus and choosing what you don't want to do rather than what you want to do, which is basically what my favorite CEO Steve Jobs once said: focus is all about deciding what you don't want to do.
Yeah,
And then also think about convenience. So
exactly.
make things easy for the customer. So once you've identified your core group and once you've identified what services you want to offer, then make it incredibly easy for the recipient to get those services.
Yeah, I mean, those points are simple. It's not rocket science. It's about looking at it and saying, how can I make that experience most efficient for the customer? Get them in and get them out of the store as quickly as possible. That's what most of them want. They don't want to be in there longer than they have to be.
True.
You don't want to have a bigger store size that confuses them, that makes them look at the more people they have to talk to. You want it to be quick, personable, and something that they remember and they go out with a positive impression in the mind. At the same time, there are mistakes that are going to happen. And it's a question of then looking at it and saying, how well can we come back and rectify this? Now, working with a brand as we are, then they start looking at the different criteria because a brand like Samsung obviously looks at the whole experience element as well. And they hold you to account. And that's a good thing because we've always looked at it from a perspective and saying, you challenge us, we'll challenge you. And if you start challenging each other, you're going to make sure you do a much better job than you've ever done before.
Absolutely. And that also kind of comes from trust and from the whole point of having an aligned interest in the final outcome.
Exactly.
So great. Now let's turn our attention a little bit more to the people side of experience and what we provide to our employees. So you're part of a business which has a lot of people who can't just get a remote working or hybrid working or any of the kind of recent things that we've been talking about. We call them the deskless employees. So people who don't sit behind a desk and who are actually your true ambassadors. Possibly about 2/3 of the workforce or more would be deskless. So in that case, what do you do for the employees to feel empowered and for the employees to kind of pass on that customer experience into the final recipient, which is the actual customer? So how do you empower and how do you want your employees to work in order to execute that customer excellence, customer experience target?
So the way I've seen it, and I think it comes in terms of how you set up the company. I have business heads who report into me, and I've always told all the business heads, you have to work as an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, you take total ownership for everything that happens. You're not boxing yourself into an area.
Mm-hmm.
And I have in the company now a culture where if you sit with even the back office roles, HR, finance, they're not typical HR finance people. They came in as typical HR finance people, but they're involved in business and they're involved in operations because they see it as part of their objective at the end of the day to see that. Now, when you've got leaders getting involved in that way, everyone else starts to look at it and saying, well, I don't work in a box. I work in a company.
Right.
And I work for the greater interests of the company. And that is what I have to look at, and that is what I have to do. And if I have to grow, I can grow upwards, but I can also grow laterally, and I can learn and I can get the experiences that help me develop in that sense. Now, with someone in the store, it's again that sense of ownership. That store is their store. That target is their target. And what they need to do to keep their customer happy, what they need to do to get their numbers in is with them. When things don't happen, we go back to them and say, where do we need to work with you? Where do we need to support you? What isn't working? What is working? What do you need more of? And it's all about getting that feedback from them at the end of the day. But also them saying, when I tried this, this worked. And I go, fantastic. And actually saying, I like the fact that you tried it. Because not everything you try will work out. But the fact that you say, I tried something means you went outside your comfort zone to say, there is something else that could have been done. And I try to work on that. And I think that is the one thing that is there, because no retail store is the same. Every store has got its own base of customers, has got its own experiences, has got its own nuances that you need to work around. Today, I was, or a couple of days ago, I was at a meeting, and I was leaving the meeting, and I had a senior government official in the same meeting, and I'm in the elevator, and he goes, Ashish, can you come out, please? And he calls me out to the elevator, and he goes, I was in your store the other day. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to hear something now. and he's like, I wanted to buy a television, and you didn't have the television in stock. And I wanted to buy 2 TVs, and you didn't have both of them in stock. But you had a guy in your store, and he named the name, and he goes, he said, sir, I will make sure you get it. I will find it for you, and I'll make sure you get it, and I'll have it delivered to you by this date. And he says, he took my number, and he was in touch with me on WhatsApp for a couple of days saying, I've got it here, I've got it here, I'm tracking it here. And he said, unfortunately, I'm not on duty today, but I've made sure everything is taken care of, and you'll have the delivery done. And he goes, it was some of the best experience I've had. Now, the person he was talking about isn't actually our employee. He works for a contractor that works in our store.
Oh, wow.
But the whole impression was, I'm working in Jacky's. And that was the whole experience that came out. And the guy who actually bought it said, I didn't even realize I was shopping in Jackie's until he told me at the end. And then he said, I understand why that service is there because he knows me well enough. And he goes, okay, before you go, Ashish, I need to take a picture with you. I said, okay. He took a picture with me and he sends it to the guy in the store. And he says, I just have to make his day because he made my day.
Wow. That is such an awesome story about how someone took ultimate ownership and made sure that the client was happy at the end of the experience.
Yeah.
And that's something that we are also trying to kind of codify. It's difficult. It's not very easy, but how can you provide the same experience to the employee as an employer? So the same experience that your customer is getting from you as a provider of goods and services, how does your employee get the same experience, given the fact that the person may be a contractor's employee and not even your own employee, sitting working in a place which is not very physically comfortable, standing for long hours, working with customers who have a very short window of interaction with them, rather than a stable, steady job where you're working on a spreadsheet and this is the spreadsheet I did last quarter. I need to repeat the same spreadsheet this quarter. How do we provide, what are the kind of additional factors that go into place? So how do you create that ownership? So this ownership, was it an individual's internal fire, or was this part of a process? Because only when we start creating experiences as part of a process can they be scalable and repeatable and predictable. Otherwise, it was a great guy who did something great, and the next guy may not do the same thing.
So again, it comes down to the culture and the leadership that sits with them in that store. And I know the team in there, and they're a fantastic team. Now, they've always had that ownership within them. They've always been the type that have said, we will work through it and we'll get it done. And whether it is our employee or it is a contractor's employee that works within our store, they wear the same uniform. They look exactly the same. So in the customer's eyes, they know all of them as the same people working in the same store. So there is no differentiation at that stage. And I think that's important to have that. We had this time where we would have the store managers dressed differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never really comfortable with that. And I actually got it changed. I said, no, let them all dress the same. Because then it's not about us and them. It's about us in total. And I think that goes a long way when you have that. And then they would say, no, but they said they will come and ask, who's the manager over here? Okay. Give them a little badge. It's a manager. But they dress the same. It's only when you go and look at the badge you realize, manager. But you don't have to get into that otherwise. And I think when they work that way and they think that way, and they dress that way, you start to see a change happen within them. The other thing I would say is also in terms of feedback. Now, I get every weekend. So we're recording this on a Friday. I will, after 6 o'clock today, between now and sometime tomorrow, get about 55, 60 emails come into me.
Okay.
And these will all be from employees. And this will all be about what they've done this week and what they're aiming to do next week. What are the issues they faced, and what are the ideas that they have. Now, not all of these 50 or 60 people report into me. They will report into other line managers as well, but I'm copied on it. But what that gives them is they get to say what they've done, because many times they feel they're doing work, but it's not recognized, or no one else knows what they've done, or they've got a suggestion. And it's not uncommon for an accountant to say, by the way, in the warehouse they could be doing this, because I noticed this happens, or with the sales team, could we be asking them to do this instead? Now that is a platform, and they're getting a chance every week to do that, and they're saying what they're going to work on in the next week. Now that brings in that whole culture of alignment as well, and that brings in the ownership that they've got.
Accountability, because they've already made a commitment in writing to you.
Exactly. But it also gives me a chance to be in touch with them without actually being in touch with them. And I know exactly then what everyone is doing. But they also know that what they need to do. And it works with their line managers as well. They have to put it in their reports if there's anything that goes on. So within the whole company and within the whole culture that you start to create that way, you start to see this. And we have a measurement tool, and we are at over 99% of them submitting it on time every week, because now they've seen it, that it's actually helps them in their work. It helps them get heard. And I think employee voice is a very important part of what is there in today's culture. The biggest issue that I think most people want to be in is in a position where they felt heard.
Yes.
And I think this is where everything has sort of gone the other way. With social media, with everything else that's gone on, it's more about people wanting to say what they want to say without actually reading and understanding what's being said. And to have that culture where you say, I will sit and listen to you as well, because I can only learn when I listen. I can't learn when I talk.
Absolutely.
And when you create that culture throughout the company where everyone is doing this and they know that's happening, the line managers are getting this feedback as well. I mean, so they're getting these reports coming into them. If they've got 7 or 8 people reporting to them, they're listening to 7 or 8 people every week instead of just dictating the other way.
No, absolutely. So I've often defined engagement is equal to choice plus voice. So one, you give people the right to exercise their choice in the way they want to do their work rather than micromanage them and just kind of be on their back every second and tell them what to do. But equally important is the voice, which is basically saying out what they believe in and what they think impacts them. So I think you're kind of doing a great job in terms of listening to your people and also kind of giving them the empowerment to have a direct channel of communication with you, which improves their line of sight on the overall business plan and helps them align with the overall results.
And I give them a commitment. By Sunday night, I would have read all of those reports. If I have to start replying or acknowledging, or if I got feedback, I'll give it to them. But by Sunday night, they'll all have feedback from me as well. So it's not just something that's going in vain. It's not something that's just going into cyberspace or in the metaverse or anywhere else. We're seeing it, and as a leader, I say I will read it, and I make sure everyone else who's being copied on it has read it by then as well. It's not that we're creating more work for anyone. I don't want to, but if we start Monday morning and we're still digging through last week's issues, we're losing that much time. We're losing that productivity. We're losing that urgency in what we should be doing.
You remind me of a CEO who I had spoken to, I think about 6 months ago. And I was explaining to him about the performance management tool that we have built, which has annual goals and monthly goals and weekly goals and stuff. He said, I don't want annual goals. Give me weekly goals. If my people hit weekly goals 52 times, I don't need to worry about annual goals. I think that's the kind of rigor that you have already instituted in the team, where they can kind of on the fly report what they've done, commit what they're going to do. It's as agile as it could be. So that's great. You mentioned about something which was part of my next question for you, which is about the role of technology. So I know you are very enthusiastic about new technology yourself, and you've been working with a number of startups. What do you think is the role that technology can play in providing a better experience to employees as against customers? So the challenge has been that customer experience has been far ahead of employee experience. So for example, if you buy something from Amazon, you can be assured that by a specific time you will get things of a specific quality, and if you for some reason unexplainable to anyone else are not happy with it, you've got a right to a cashback or a refund, no questions asked. And that's the kind of expectations we already carry in our mind. So when we talk about digital experiences, when we talk about our experience as customers, these are things we now take for granted. The presence of these is not wow, but the absence of this is a strong reason for me to move and look for something else. So if Netflix doesn't provide that seamless, great experience to me, I'll go to something else. So we are now living in an age where as consumers, we are carrying extremely high standards of experience. But unfortunately, we don't seem to carry the same experiences at the workplace, because I might join today and I might get my business card in my laptop 6 days from now. Even that small little bit of procurement is not up to mark. I may just spend the first 1 week or 2 weeks trying to figure my way around the organization, 3 days for a line manager meeting. So obviously, those are things that are big drags on employee experience. How can we use technology, and especially emerging technology, things like the metaverse, which we have started initiating a pilot on? It's still very early. We are just kind of talking about a very small use case rather than a full-blown application of the metaverse. But 3 years from now or 5 years from now, how do you see the whole employee experience thing being shaped by technology?
I mean, it's interesting. So I said it many years ago with our retail team. I said the concept of loyalty doesn't exist. Because there's no reason for anyone to be loyal to anyone at this day and age. And in its most crudest form, everything comes down to a transaction and the experience of that transaction. And that is actually what makes the biggest difference. Now, the consistency that you can build is actually what leads to success at the end of the day. And this is exactly what you were talking about in your experience with Netflix and everything else. And I think we're lucky we sit, especially in the Middle East and in particular in Dubai, where the standard and the benchmark has been set very high. And it's been set high by, yes, the Noons and the Amazons and the e-commerce players on one end and the food delivery services, but on the other end by the government.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and if I look at the way the government works over here, the government embarrasses the private sector time in and time out, and over again, with the way that they do things. In most parts of the world, the government drags and the private sector leads. Here, the government leads and the private sector tries to keep up with
Tries
it.
to catch up. Yeah.
And I think this is where the expectation and that standard comes in from. Is you look at it and you say, if a government service is that efficient, why can't I be? If everything else that is there, and you go into a government office today, or you go in for a service in a government office, and the quality of service you get over there is impressive. They will go out of their way to make sure you walk out happy, and that's why they call them happiness centers, because they're measured on that basis. And we look at that, and we look at the tools and the technologies that they're using. Now, I have another hat in that we have a B2B solutions business, and part of that works in that whole visitor management space. So I know some of what goes on in the back end, because we're held accountable when things don't work and when systems don't work, or if KPIs aren't met by those clients. So there is a very, very high expectation and the very high penalties when things aren't done. But at the end of the day, any sort of technology implementation comes down to a very simple thing. What problem are you solving? What are you actually making better? And I think this is the key to anything being successful or not successful as an implementation, is what problem are you actually going out there and solving? And how do you measure that? And how do you quantify that? And how do you show the difference because of that? Quite too often you see implementations of things that are nice to have, or that aren't necessarily, they make you feel warm inside, but they aren't actually solving a problem. So do you really need to go through that or not? And I think for an employee, that is the most frustrating thing that can be there, is if they don't understand what the benefit will be in there. Now, again, that said, you can have the best solution out there, but you need a customer to accept it as well. And I think this has been one of the bigger things that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, with the advent of COVID, is customers have learned to accept when you try to do things a little differently, and when you try to change patterns, and when you try to be a little more innovative. And an example I often give is that of McDonald's. Now, McDonald's started putting kiosks in a lot of their restaurants a couple of years ago. And you'd have a couple of kiosks, and you'd have the counters where people could go and order their food. And everyone is in line ordering the food, and no one touched the kiosk. And that was the norm in that time, and the kiosk just sat there. Eventually, you start to see McDonald's saying, we're going to increase the number of kiosks and we'll reduce the number of counters. And suddenly there are 2 counters in the store and there are 6 kiosks. Now you can wait in line in the 2 counters, or you can stand behind the 6 kiosks and get served immediately over there.
Yes.
There is an inconvenience for the customer in that. The employee behind the counter is probably getting shouted at, why are there only 2 of you over here? But what the customer starts to see is suddenly the experience of ordering through a kiosk is a lot better. They don't have to deal with anyone. They pay immediately. They customize. Everything is done. They don't have to explain. And over the period, that becomes a habit for the customer. And they start to do that. Now, for anyone else in that business, the kiosk was always going to be difficult for them to implement. McDonald's was in a position of dominance where they could say, we're reducing it down to 2 counters and putting 6 kiosks or 8 kiosks in the store, and that's the way it's going to be. Now, everyone else who comes in with a kiosk after that and saying, because McDonald's has done it, we can try and do it, starts to suddenly see customer acceptance. And the employees feel a lot better because they're a lot more efficient as well. They're not having to struggle to understand. They're not doing things that were a hindrance to them or more difficult for them at that stage. They're actually focusing on making sure the customer gets his meal as quickly as possible in the best possible way, and they're out. And that's what they do. That's where they add value in that case.
Pretty much the same in the self-service checkout in hypermarkets, where you had to queue up for so long, and now
so today, if a Spinneys or a Carrefour has got self-service checkouts and people are accepting them, it's because a McDonald's put a kiosk in a restaurant before that. So they've learned to accept that because those things were there before COVID, but no one wanted to go near them. And when you have the customer willing to accept it, or even the simple act of scanning a QR code and getting a menu that way, was something that existed years ago. The fact is, we've all changed since then. And the other big difference that's come in, especially during COVID, is we've learned to think like the customer as an employee. Because now we start going anywhere else and we're like, yeah, I don't want to touch a menu. I want to get in and out as quickly as possible. I don't want to be doing this. I don't want to be doing that. I'd rather pay this way. I'd rather self-checkout. I'd rather have it delivered. And everyone starts to think more like the customer. And I think that's where the biggest changes come in, is employees then come back and say, could we be doing this instead? And this is where most of the ideas come in from. And it's not only in retail. Today, if I look at the startup scene and the work we do with TIE and other engagements I have, the number of edtech startups that are coming in the education space, where people have been former teachers and have now pivoted, and you're seeing the great resignation happen. The great resignation isn't happening because people are frustrated. It's because they've got this light bulb in their head saying, we could be doing something better in education. And instead of being a teacher, I could be doing something in edtech, and I could be doing something over there. Right? I've been a banker, I've been in finance, and I'm going to move into fintech because I see an idea. Or your story, you were in HR, and you pivoted into doing something exactly the same way. And I think this is the biggest thing, is employees start to take ownership of it. The really brave ones say, we're going to become entrepreneurs and actually build around this. But the others come back and say, we're willing to accept this and we're willing to work with it. But also on the other side, we know the customer is willing to understand that we're experimenting and we're trying something different, and we're going to work with them on that. So I think that whole experience story is an evolving story, and it doesn't stop. Retail has always been a business about investment. You are constantly investing in everything that you do. We were always investing in terms of training, in terms of fit out, in terms of merchandising, inventory systems. Then it moved into your online experience. It moved into the integration of that. It moved into delivery. It moved into everything else. There is never an end to the investment that has to go into any sort of business. You're constantly looking at it, and you're constantly saying, what next? What else do I have to be doing? And I think if you have that culture there, and Dubai is great for that, because they've always been saying, okay, now what next? You don't stop and say, I've reached my destination.
You never stop. You always keep moving.
Yeah, and it's exactly what Sheikh Mohammed said when the Dubai Internet City was established back in 2002. He said, in the race for excellence, there is no finish line. And I think that's the culture of the city that we live in.
Absolutely. And I've seen the transformation, some of which you were mentioning. So Deva, of course, was always top notch from my first visit till my last visit. Everything, it just kept getting better. But there were also things which were not that great, like the post office. And my first few visits to the post office reminded me of the government kind of offices back home. But then when I went in last to collect my current Emirates ID and I saw the place saying, okay, my God, is this the same place? And that's the kind of transformation that's not easy.
And it's heartening to hear that, because these are all clients of ours, and I know the work that they go through, and they've worked extremely hard. They've made us work extremely hard, but I know they've worked extremely hard at their end as well to make this happen.
So that's fantastic. So this is absolutely a journey with no finish line, whether it's for the customers or for the employees. The customer race is a little bit ahead of the employee race, but I'm sure with expertise that we get from people like you on platforms like these, Ashish, we will for sure build the knowledge and build the insights that can take the employee experience to a similar level as where we see customer experience. It was
Exactly.
amazing talking to you and getting your insights on a wide variety of areas. The whole kind of idea on focus, convenience, in and out, don't confuse the customer, and whether it is about solving a real problem, and the fact that there is hope for newer solutions and technologies because the world is opening up to that. You need a leader, a big player to kind of set the pace, but then others can kind of ride that same wave as well.
Yeah, and I'd say don't get disheartened. I think with anything new, with anything different, okay, some things will work, some things won't work, some things are just too early. But that doesn't mean you should forget it and discard it, because there would be a time that it may come back into vogue again, and then you say, "I've had it and I've been ready with it." So I think it's we're in a culture where people are a lot more accepting. I don't call it failure. Okay, failure is there, but I think it's a question of how do you keep innovating and how do you keep improving on what you did, and keep iterating. And if that leads to a pivot, that leads to a pivot. Fantastic. But I don't think any effort is wasted effort at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ashish, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your insights. And we will host this out in public domain on LinkedIn and YouTube and Spotify. And if we have questions related to what you've said, we will reach back to you, and maybe we can get back to our audiences with your answers to those questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, please continue doing what you're doing. It's important for people to hear these stories and to be a part of it. And I hope they keep sharing it as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you.